statements here. First up is the, I believe, virtual notice of non-discrimination. So you're invited to participate in our transportation planning process regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status or background. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. Participants may mute and unmute themselves, but please always remain muted unless actively speaking. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function by either clicking on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom or the reactions button in the toolbar, and the chair will then call on participants. If you are on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. And if you have any technical difficulties, please contact Erin McGuire via the chat box by email at emaguire@ctps.org or by phone at 857-702-3681. The accessibility statement reads that this meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, Level AA standards, and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Erin McGuire of MPO staff at emaguire@ctps.org or 857-702-3681. Now move to our first agenda item, which is introductions. I'll go ahead and call the roll here. My name is Derek Cravat from MassDOT's Office of Transportation Planning. I'm chair for the UPWP committee. I'll read down the list here. Julia Wallers from MAPC. Or anyone from MAPC? Don't see anyone, so I'll move to the next. Town of Arlington. City of Boston. Jen.
Representing Mayor Michelle Wu in the City of Boston.
Framingham or Metro West. Rentham, the SWAP region. City of Newton, at-large city.
David Koza, City of Newton, representing Mayor Fuller.
Great. Town of Norwood, Trick subregion.
Good morning, Tom O'Rourke from the town of Norwood in the Trick subregion.
Great. And City of Somerville for Inner Core. And Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Here. Against here.
Great. Yep. Good morning. And MBTA Advisory Board. I see Brian, he's here, so hello, Brian. All right, I think that's the roll. Did I miss anyone?
Here.
Oh, great. All right, with that, we'll move on to public comments. Is there anyone present that would like to make a comment at this time? See a hand from Dan. Go ahead, Dan. You might have muted again.
Okay, let's try this time. Am I unmuted, hopefully?
Yep. Yeah, we can hear you now. Yep.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
I'm want to talk a little bit about the Silver Line move into the Sullivan Square connection point. I'm very disappointed here. That is really going to hurt the Charlestown community, because the next jump, which we know is going to happen, is to go down Rutherford Ave or go down Cambridge. And neither one of these points are really good for the community locally. We really cannot have the Silver Line traversing into Sullivan Square. It really doesn't work. There is a better solution, which is good for both Everett and Charlestown, and that is the Orange Line, Spur Line into Everett, and having an Everett station as an endpoint for the Silver Line to enter into right at the MBTA bus yard. That is the right answer. And really, with the enhancements that that Everett wants to do within their lower Broadway area, namely the power station that they want to make into a stadium, and then they have a huge fuel farm area that needs to be redeveloped. And so that's going to be a huge influx of more traffic. And Charlestown, we can't handle it. We just can't handle what we're going to be again doing ourselves. So the Silver Line is not an answer here into the Boston space. I'm not against Silver Line. It's just that our street space is very narrow, and you're going to flatten the concept of flattening Rutherford Ave to make way for the Silver Line is actually going to cut us off. So we can't win. We lose. So Everett wins, Charlestown loses. I don't want that. I live in Charlestown. I love this community. It's the wrong answer for a problem that does not exist. If we just stick with what we have now or stick with the 2019 design, which we thought very hard and long on. And this is not the right answer. Please, let's not do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, we'll be sure. I know the Silver Line extension study was through MassDOT planning, and certainly familiar with that and familiar with folks who are working on it. So I'll be sure to pass that on to them and make sure that that's received. So thank you for the comment. Any other public comments? All right. Seeing none, we'll move into sort of the main agenda item here, which is the fiscal year 2025 UPWP universe. I'll turn it over to Srilekha.
Thank you, Derek, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining for this meeting. Next slide, please. So my talking points are very short. I want to make sure we have enough time to go through the universe. Just to reiterate, the goal for today's meeting is to review all of the studies in the universe of proposed studies, the link to which you can find in the meeting calendar for today, and we'll drop it into the chat just in a second. As I noted at our last meeting, studies in the universe are divided between study suggestions that we received that can be incorporated into our ongoing work programs, highlighted in pink, and studies that could potentially be funded as discrete studies with no highlight. The goal here, again, today is to answer questions and make any clarifications on study ideas, and for us to start coming up with a list of preferred studies to fund. Looking ahead, following this meeting, I will be sending out a survey for both committee members and staff to rank their priorities on the discrete studies specifically, not necessarily the ones that are going to be incorporated into program work. And the next committee meeting on April 11th, I'll present the results of that survey, and we'll decide on which studies we're going to fund in FFY 2025. As a note, we still do not yet have our budget for the discrete studies program for FFY 2025. But just to reiterate, we are expecting that it will not be more than $150,000 level funded from FFY 2024. So with that, can we switch the screen share to the universe?
Great. Thanks, Srilekha. So I believe last time we left off on, was it A5? Yeah.
So I think that's one that we are going to talk about would be A1 of studies that can be incorporated into ongoing work programs. So that's page 5, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is it this?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So as noted in the notes for this study, we of course received this very thorough idea of reviewing the various bike plans around the area, and our bike and pedestrian planner, Casey Cooper, is working on doing just this over the next few years within the bicycle and pedestrian planning program. I don't think Casey is here, but if there are, oh, there she is. If there are any questions, I'm happy to start answering while she logs on.
Great. Any questions on this one? All right. Don't see any, so can probably move to the next one then. Or,
Right.
yep, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so A2 is looking at more directly assessing the parking on speeds, pedestrian safety, business activities, specifically on commercial streets. This is something that I think staff are working on. Data is being collected, but not specifically related to the removal of parking. However, I think there is a desire to potentially incorporate this work. Again, I'll let Casey or someone from the multimodal team go into some more specifics if there are questions on this.
Thanks, Srileka. Any questions on this one? Leonard?
Well, more of a statement. I think it'd be good to maybe incorporate this into some of the freight studies that we see in the universe later on. If possible. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? David?
Yes, I think this is really an interesting idea. Do we have any sense of how the data would be, who would be, is it interviews with cities and towns or with businesses or going out to count cars or any initial thoughts, or hasn't been flushed out yet?
So I will ask Casey or Rana if they're on to answer that. They're able to.
I'm not sure if Casey is able to answer that, but to the best of my knowledge, no.
Okay, so it just still needs to be flushed out, but we're keeping it on here for now, right?
Sounds like I know it's highlighted here, Srileka, but if there's interest in having this, be part of the ranking survey, as a more fleshed out idea, that, seems like it's of interest. So that may be good. I mean, I think
Right.
just the topic in general, right, is something that I know we talk about a lot, and that if there is a study on, case studies, I know there was some case study on the future of the curb, I think touched on this a little bit. So there's been some prior work, but yeah, if it's like, challenges or best practices communities have maybe experienced in this area, seems like that might be something worth including and seeing how it ranks relative to the other ideas.
Right.
Yeah,
And
I
I know
think-
that, I'm sorry, I know that you mentioned at the beginning the difference between the pink rows and the white ones. Can you just say that again?
Yes, the studies highlighted in pink are those that we are looking to incorporate into our ongoing program work. So for example, A1, 2, and 3, this is work that either the bicycle and pedestrian program or in general, the multimodal planning program would be looking to take on over the next couple of years. So specifically for A2, I think the data collection portion of this idea is something that staff want to look into for either next year or the year after as kind of a baseline, and then potentially look into the best practices and some of the other elements that you all have mentioned after that initial data collection is completed.
All right, so does that mean if it's part of ongoing work, it would not be something that we would be voting on as a discrete project for the UPWP?
Correct.
Okay.
I think maybe the preference is to get some interest or some thoughts or questions around it surrounding the studies highlighted in pink. So staff can kind of know what to prioritize, potentially in what year as well. But the ones that are kind of going to be ranked are the ones that are not highlighted.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Well, still good to know, I think it's of interest, right? So it's some direction for the task when it does happen. And we can always build on it in the future. Yeah, Jen.
I just wanted to voice, I guess, support for, I guess, A1 would align very nicely with we're going through a process of kind of generating or revisiting our bike ped network, so that we can coordinate on that effort with what you all are doing. And then the other piece I just wanted to add to A2, there was a Somerville Street Talk earlier this week, and someone brought up a interesting study that had been conducted in Montreal around, I think what ended up being a somewhat controversial bike segment, I think cycle track that on a business district area that presumably required some removal of parking, and they actually ended up being able to purchase some like credit card data that then built allowed them to kind of demonstrate that businesses next to this facility actually had more economic activity than ones that did not have received this treatment that were like adjacent. So anyway, I thought it was an interesting kind of approach to the kind of business angle there, and something that might be worth exploring. Sure, that data is not inexpensive, but
That's really interesting. Thanks, Jen. David?
And I'll add my voice to support A2 as well. It's always, a big part of our conversation to remove on-street parking for all kinds of reasons, right? To add bike lanes for in-street dining, just, for safer pedestrian crossings. It's always very controversial. So I think any kind of data that's collected, pretty much any kind of data would be useful for us as we go into these controversial discussions. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, David. All right. Don't see others on that, so can move on to A3.
Yeah, so as our notes kind of indicate, Blue Bikes does already do some of this work, but I guess some elements of this could be incorporated into our existing bike ped count work. Again, if there are any questions, happy to answer or happy to field them or pass them along if necessary.
Okay. Any questions or comments on this one? Okay. Oh yeah, sounds like it, is one that's more clearly, right, incorporated in other work, so that's good. All right, with that, then we'll move on to the freight section, F1 on sort of larger regional decarbonization efforts for freight sector. So I don't know, Aaron's here, Srileka, whoever wants to kind of maybe just give a quick overview on this one.
Yeah, I can start, and Aaron, you can jump in when you feel like when you want to. So as you all know, our sustainability and decarbonization in the North South region study is wrapping up. This was something that we started funding in FFY 2023, and staff are proposing that we continue this work. There was a lot of stakeholder engagement. We did receive multiple comments through this survey that are not listed in the universe, but were received and reviewed, encouraging us to continue this work. So if Aaron, you have more details on what you're actually looking to do, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, the main core of this proposal would be creating a action plan to work towards decarbonizing freight in the entire Boston region. From that discrete study that Srileka mentioned, the stakeholder feedback that we got is that they are interested in further, more tangible steps towards achieving these sustainability goals. So this would just be queuing us up to continue that body of work.
Thanks, Srileka and Aaron. Thoughts on this one? Questions? Leonard?
Yeah, thank you. So, this is one where I think we can accomplish a few goals in addition to this. When we look at how freight, as we decarbonize it, can be more friendly towards the curb, for transit, and for cycling, and maybe even other uses of the curb that benefit businesses. So yeah, let's try to multitask on this one. So as I say to people, I'm not very good at doing more than one thing at a time, but I try to have any action accomplish more than one purpose. And I think we can expand the scope of this, and really make it a powerful study. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Leonard. Tom?
Thank you. Just a question in terms of like, how do you define freight? You talking just about trucks or what?
So in the study itself, we defined freight as the movement of bulk goods. So that includes freight trucks, delivery vans, air travel, sea travel, rail travel, which isn't really prevalent in Massachusetts. And then also explored tangential ways to improve freight conditions and interactions with freight. So it can definitely be expanded upon and thought of in different chunks.
Right. Thank you.
Darren? Len, did you have your hand up from last time? Another comment? No. Okay, great. Yeah. Jen?
Plug to include strategies around not just like electrified large freight vehicles, but also like alternative modes of delivery, including both like rail and also e-bike. Something we are working to explore. And actually, I will send around a link to an event we are having about our Alston e-bikes delivery pilot in the chat.
Great. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, I personally like this idea. I think that seems like it would be useful. I've seen a draft now of the original study from this year, and it seems like the results are pretty valuable for communities involved in the North Suffolk area. So, certainly feels supportive of this. I think it's a good, it seems like the results would be very tangible and useful for communities. So, it's interesting, and yeah, like the proposal to make it more multimodal, add in information on e-bike pilots and other ways of getting freight around. So that's great. All right, I don't see any other hands, so we can move on to the next one. Region-wide freight priority. Yep.
The next 3 studies are those that we are looking to incorporate into our freight programs ongoing activities. So the first, creating a region-wide freight priority network map would, as sort of stated in the description, would try and build upon the existing 2023 Massachusetts Freight Plan. When we discuss this as staff, this is something that potentially we could work into our freight dashboard, which is an activity that staff are looking to pursue. This might be, as big as a dashboard, as small as a mapping exercise. But one avenue that we're also looking to pursue is the use of Replica to get some information on truck volumes, since there are just so many roadways that might not necessarily be classified as for freight, especially with how we are defining it, all the sort of various definitions of freight and just the delivery and movement of goods. So this is definitely an interesting study, and I'll see if Ronak or Shravanthi are online to answer any questions.
Great. Thanks, Shalika. Any questions on this one? F1 highlighted. Tom?
Good morning, and sorry for joining late. Got tied up in another meeting earlier. Just a question, and I know the MPO received some information a while back about Looking at, we have our bus lanes now, right? And in, I think it was Seattle or Portland, they, kind of modified the bus only lanes to include like freight deliveries, things like that. Would that be an area where, would that tie into this piece, do you think, at all, to take a look at that to see if that's doable here?
I don't know. I'll ask Rana to jump in there.
Yeah, I don't think we've considered that perspective. Since we discussed this idea, there's been a new development. The Biden administration has released a nationwide freight priority plan for the next 5 years or so. And I think some of the information that they have released could tie into what we're doing at the regional scale. So I see this as more of a mapping exercise. We are currently exploring the replica data set to see if we can get meaningful truck traffic volumes, especially separating out the different types of freight vehicles, but we don't have a definite answer yet.
Okay, no, I just know it's one of the things that we've noticed here is that, say, you have a long stretch, like say Broadway and Somerville, where it went from 2 lanes down to 1, and you have the bus priority lane. And a lot of the trucks that are there are making deliveries to stores and restaurants and things like that. And, people are seeing that the bus lane is empty. Most of the time they're sitting there because, the bus is either, it's just basically empty. And like, from what I understood in Portland, I think it was Portland, they started to let trucks go into the bus lanes to make deliveries and things like that. So it was just something, I'm not sure where it would fit in for a study here.
Oh, thanks, Tom. Yeah, I mean, I think that first one, right, decarbonizing freight, like a region-wide freight decarbonization study, it feels like that could fall under that umbrella, right, of like just looking at strategies across the whole region and that area. So yeah, and Leonard's suggestion too about expanding it to be multimodal. I feel like that, that could be a larger study, right? That could look at a lot of different things if it's like, just 1 or 2 among this list. So yeah, it's a good idea.
Thanks.
Yeah. And yeah, I'll just say on this one too, we do have federal funding specifically for freight projects, National Highway Freight Program funding. It's its own funding source, and I don't think it's all being used right now. So this task and this mapping exercise, I think, would be really useful for us at MassDOT too, just to see, like it's mentioned here, the freight plan we have is really on, it's a little high level. It doesn't really get down to the local level. So having an understanding of corridors that are, sort of freight priority or critical freight, corridor like, on a different scale would be really interesting and useful. So, all right, can move on to the next one. Decarbonizing, looking at, again, just for e-cargo bikes for first and last mile deliveries.
Yeah. Abby, could we just move to the next page? Thanks. So I think this study it digs down a bit more specifically into e-cargo bikes as part of decarbonization. And like our notes indicate, this is something that our freight planner is incorporating into her work plan for the next fiscal year. So this was a very interesting topic, and this is something that staff are going to pursue in the near future. Happy to take any questions.
Great. Any questions on this one? All right. No, good to see it moving forward in the freight program. It sounds like the next one is in that boat too.
Yes. Yeah, same thing here. A super interesting idea, something definitely needed in our region, and something that our freight planner is going to be working on, at least in the coming, at least a little bit next year, if not in the future as well.
Great. Multimodal mobility hub. Cool. Any questions on that? Rebecca?
Hi, thanks. I was just kind of looking at these ideas and thinking about the comments that have been made. And I think the ones that are highlighted seem to be a little bit more like discrete tasks to me. And so I know we've been chatting a little bit. I would like to kind of for what would be in the freight program, because I don't think we'll be able to cover all of these with the budget and the freight program. So I think we need to do a little bit more thinking on the freight side. Convening a group makes sense in the freight program, but some of these discrete studies around looking at e-bikes for freight and things like that seem to me to be maybe better suited for a discrete study. But I just wanted to voice that and say we'd like an opportunity to come back based on what we're hearing from all of you to kind of rethink what we think might make sense for the freight program when we would actually be able to do those things with the budget. And there may be some shifts in thinking around these ideas.
Cool. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, to understand that, like what there's room for and what there's not. And if there's not room, right, we could use it as a discrete study and pick it up here. So that, yeah, it seems like it would be good to put anything in the ranking survey that's in that category of discrete. So can talk more offline on that. Brian?
Thanks, Derek. Yeah, just actually following up on what Rebecca said, which I didn't know she was going to say, which is great. Two things. So just to offer, I actually have some members who are in the freight industry, freight rail industry, happy to make those connections. And related to that is sort of the question is, I know we've been doing freight studies for years. I think it's time that we kind of try to package it a little bit and put it around a bigger vision of what we're trying to accomplish. I mean, it's great to study freight. I know we have money to do it, but there's no point in spending money for the sake of spending money. So, you know, I think just following up on what Rebecca said is a great idea. You know, can we convene some freight folks, some people that actually move goods and services around the region and see what if they're interested in and what makes sense to them, and then what makes sense to us, and then put it all together and make sure that we're coordinated on this and just sort of try to get our arms around it a little bit. So I think what Rebecca said is great, and I would fully support that. And I just think we kind of need a freight sort of approach that we can all agree on. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Brian. Leonard?
Brian wants a freight summit. Give Brian a freight summit. So respect to F3, I mean, I think with the exception of a couple mentions of e-cargo bikes, I mean, it doesn't seem to me as if there is much connection to freight here, you know, which is fine, because I do like the multimodal mobility aspect of it. And I would like to see us kind of pursue that, perhaps as Rebecca said, maybe as a discrete study. And what I really would like to see thrown into this mix is car sharing, you know, because I think that kind of fits in with a lot of things that are mentioned, you know, in the description of that one. That's it. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Len. All right. Don't see any other hands, so we can move on to the next category, roadway and multimodal mobility. Got M1 here.
Yeah, so this is something that staff have been talking internally about as something that we could potentially pursue as a discrete study, since there are just so many overlaps between programs, and there is additional overlap with a later bike share study that can be found in this universe. So again, here, happy to take questions. Yeah, if there are any.
Great. Thanks, Shalika. Questions? This is like understanding, right? Like how, like, yeah, parking rates at bike parking facilities or bike racks on buses, how many people use those. Is anyone from the MBT, I mean, I don't know if anyone at the T is working on this already, but I'd be interested in hearing that, right? Like how they're collecting this data, if at all. And if not, maybe there's room for it, but I think I'd be curious to know that. So perhaps there could be some follow-up there. Leonard?
Well, from the needs assessment for the LRTP, I mean, there was some inkling, so some data about how people are using Blue Bikes to connect me to the various T stations. And so there's some data there on that. I mean, as far as on bike racks, on buses, I don't know. And certainly if you want to query Mully some more, I know him, be happy to have him come to the meeting and we could just really grill him hard just for the fun of it. That's the thing.
Excellent. Jen?
I just wanted to note that I do think there's been a flurry of activity in this area at the T, just from what Roby's been working on, and I know they proposed the park and ride TIP funding project. So there might be some helpful kind of interconnection there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, so we can probably do some background research on that and see what they have. And then, there's of course the Blue Bikes study being funded right now through the UPWP on first and last mile connections of Blue Bikes, at least to, might, be one small piece of the larger multimodal connections to transit, but still interesting and covers some of this. So, all right. Any other thoughts on this one? All right, we can move on to M2, bikes and trains.
So for M2 and M3, since this was suggested by staff, I'll actually turn it over to Ronak to answer any questions or provide any additional context for both of these.
You there, Ronak?
Oh, yes. Happy to field any questions. Also happy to provide an overview. These are pretty large paragraphs.
Yep. Okay. I see a hand from Len, so go ahead, Len.
Yes, I actually have a question for Jen. I mean, I'd like to know what she thinks about M3. Yeah.
Sorry, still reading it through.
Okay, sorry to put you on the spot. I'm sorry to put you on the spot. No problem.
It's okay. I will say for the first one, just and this study, sorry, it's M2. I know Pete Roby has also been helping. We've been pushing, and he's been pushing internally in the T around, like, there's been an ongoing challenge we have around the T charging for reviewing applications to have Blue Bikes at their stations, and also ongoing fees that they have for stations placed on their property. So anyway, that's a kind of more of a thing where I think we're hoping there's going to be some progress on that, but it would be could be helpful to have some additional information about how there could be very complementary services. But yes, on the M3, yeah, I'm going to continue reading it. I'll comment if anyone else has thoughts.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Jen. I'm sorry. It was more the Boston link that made me interested in the whole mode shift. I mean, I think it's a pretty aggressive target, 75% reduction. But yeah, I applaud it and would like to see what we could do to support it. I mean, I know thinking about Arlington, I mean, what would induce more mode shift? I mean, there at least people claim this is that if the T worked better, I would use transit more. I mean, so I think it would be like, okay, well, I mean, how much more service do we need to provide? I mean, is it a matter of frequency? I mean, I think that is primarily it, but maybe there are other factors. So that's it. I mean, so these are both intriguing. Thank you.
Excellent.
I'll say it, like, I also do really like. I think it is a good line of inquiry. I think there might be some overlap too with, like, the continuation of, which I guess is another, and we can move on to that portion yet, but like the continuation of the roadway pricing work, I guess, from my understanding from a policy perspective, like, it's going to be very hard to make any progress on any climate goals until you make driving more expensive one way or the other. And that, like, of course, you need to be developing alternatives for people, but that, like, the primary lever needs to be discouragement of driving, probably from a pricing perspective. So anyway, I could see an interesting connection with this, but I do think, like, one of the key things we need to do for the roadway pricing is, like, understand what our key goals are, and for me, climate one is one of those key goals. So maybe there's a connection to be drawn there. Sorry, no, Brian had
Yeah,
his hand
that's
up.
great. Yeah, thanks, Jen. Brian, or did you have a comment? Brian? Okay, all right. Yeah, yep, all good points. I think on the mode shift question, I mean, I know there's a ton of research out there about those questions, right? Like what it takes to induce mode shift, like national research. It's been studied quite a lot. So I don't know, I don't know how much different studies that have looked at those questions from other regions are from what we'd find in Boston, but I'd be curious to, just see what the specific, I guess, results would be for this one. And how it's unique to the Boston region, before, voting on it. But I like the first one seems interesting here too. Although I know that there is, again, just that ongoing bike share first last mile connection work happening right now already. So I don't know, Renak, does that like build on that existing study, Blue Bikes and access to MBTA stations?
Yeah, to a certain extent. So the currently funded study is looking at facilitating that first last mile connection between Blue Bikes and the T. This study is a more broader exploration of trying to understand the relationship between Blue Bikes and the T. So what kinds of trips are more susceptible to being substituted? What kinds of transit trips are more susceptible to being substituted by bike sharing, and in what kinds of locations, and where might we be able to facilitate better connections and complementarity rather than substitution? So it does build on the existing study, but also I think takes us in a couple of new directions.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. That sounds good. Thank you. All right. Move on to the next study here, M4, roadway pricing. Leonard, or yeah, I don't know, Stu, like if you wanted an overview, or if, I think we all know this topic,
Yeah.
right? So,
I just want to say
go ahead,
ding, 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 ding. Really want this. So yeah, I've been disappointed before. So if you don't get it, you can also be a happy member of the board. But it'd be great to do this one. That's it. Thank you.
Excellent. Brian?
Just a question on if this is funded, this would start in like October of 24, 25. When would this start? When would it finish?
October 24 it would start.
When would it finish?
Ideally by September 25. So it's for the next federal fiscal year.
All right. Well, in that case, I'm going to suggest we don't do it because this is going to have to get done by the end of December of 24 to have any role in the TF squared process, which I'm on. And I can tell you this is already going to get looked at really extensively. So I don't know. I just think it's the sequencing doesn't work. To Len's point, he's right. We should have done this years ago. There's been some preliminary work done on it. So why don't we just publish what we have and stop studying and start doing?
Brian?
Okay. I mean, I can handle that, Brian. So my disappointment is no longer there. It's not there. Thank you. Sorry to jump in. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Yeah. I mean, it's getting done, right? So as long as it's happening, it's just
Right.
a matter of who. Yeah. Jen and then Rebecca.
I guess I'm gonna maybe disagree with Brian on this one. I feel like the types of things that we might do at a regional level are potentially somewhat overlapping, but fairly distinct from the types of things we might do for roadway pricing at a statewide level. And I think that I think we're quite a ways away from having consensus politically on something at a regional level and I think this study could help us get there. I do think it would be ideal if staff could be using some program time outside of a UPWP study to be moving some things along in the meantime. But I really I think, at a statewide level, like VMT type and gas tax changes, like those sort of things make sense there, but at a regional level, it would be something more like tolling or like cordon pricing. So I think those are things we need to continue exploring and also like understand the environmental justice like impacts of.
Thanks, Jen. Brian, did you want to respond to that? I know Rebecca handed to
Yeah,
part of the same discussion.
Rebecca, I take your point. It's sort of an academic perspective. If we don't implement it through TF squared by the end of this year, if the legislature doesn't buy it, then it's off the table for the next decade. So the study is going to be moot anyway when it's done in 2025. We have an opportunity to implement it, and like I said, we should either do it or stop talking about it. But yeah, let's keep studying it. That's fine. I mean, we're not going to do it anywhere. If we don't do it in Boston, we're not going to do it anywhere. There's no other place where it makes any sense in New England, frankly. So, yeah, I mean, fine, do it. Don't leave it in there. It's cool. And we'll just keep plowing ahead. But I do want to just reiterate that the work that's already been done needs to be published and shared so that we can use it to help try to fund transportation in Massachusetts.
Brian, Rebecca?
Yeah, I'm just going to speak to the timing of this. Although, the fiscal year starts in October and ends in September of 2025, there's nothing stopping us from prioritizing this work. I don't see this as necessarily taking us 12 months. So we could kind of at least areas where it's like this would be of real interest by the end of the calendar year, we could really focus in on those areas and have deliverables based on that timing. So I think we do have some flexibility in when we would actually do this work. So if timing of December would be necessary for this or for aspects of this to actually make sense for us to move forward with, we could prioritize some of that work in the first few months of the fiscal year.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Tegan?
Yeah, thanks. Just to add to what Rebecca is saying as well, calling this out, actually the staff comments on this one it allude to something that I think deserves being stated explicitly, which is that even though this is called out as a discrete study line item, because it's worthwhile as potentially something that stands outside of our ongoing work and programs, this is a continuing conversation with staff now. So as follow-on to the presentation of the roadway pricing work that we've already done and some of the conversations at the board level about the work that the MBTA was supporting and doing around looking at potential revenue streams for the MBTA, we've been following up on some policy discussions and work with Abby Katrumbas in her policy analyst position, as well as we are convening more folks internally. As this note indicates, we're bringing together more of our staff in the coming weeks and months to talk more about how we can advance the work within our kind of existing programmatic areas in the interim. So I see this as sort of a placeholder for a discrete chunk of work that could be done towards the beginning of the next fiscal year from a budgeting perspective. But that doesn't mean that we're not discussing and advancing the topic, knowing that it's important to the board in the interim with the resources that we can. So I just want to make sure that it doesn't feel like it's something that is completely standalone and not integrated into our conversations and work in the meantime as well.
Thanks, Tegan. Yeah, that's helpful. Len?
Yeah, thanks. The advisory council is very much enthusiastic about this and has very much the attitude of let's do stuff now also, especially with regard to maybe some possible pilots. And to complement what's been said about the timing is Brian, I, and I think probably maybe some people on the advisory council would be happy to help you do any research that you would want to pull together, the research that has been done, maybe here in other places, definitely other places. And if we could help, you could help us also formulate some questions for this study that would be helpful for you to have answers to by the end of the year. So I think it's an invitation for you to help form the study. That's it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Len. Jen?
Question for Brian. You had mentioned like publishing existing work completed. Like my understanding was that staff had posted and we discussed the roadway pricing report. Was there something else you were referring to?
Do you mind if I respond, Derek?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, Jen, and I don't want to get in the way of the internal processes, but we heard some intriguing information out of staff. there's information that could be incredibly helpful as policymakers are attempting to solve problems. You know, we heard today there's going to be a new House Chair of Transportation come 2025. There's windows of opportunity opening here, and what we need is information. And as someone who has worked on this for years, you know, I think we just need the information. I mean, I wrote down and I've watched the video multiple times, but I can't really reference that when chatting to people. So it'd be really good to have a piece of paper or a link to point them to. But you guys all know my feelings on this, so I'll stop now. I see Tegan shaking her head at me, so I'll stop.
Right. Tegan?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming back to that, Jen, actually, and Brian, because I did actually mean to comment on that as well. That is something we have published the MPO funded roadway pricing study, but it is, as is often the case with our usual materials, a longer report that is meant to kind of package everything up for the board. We are working on, and then of course there was a study for the MBTA, that's an internal document to the MBTA. So what we are working on doing is repackaging those materials that we've already kind of worked and researched that was MPO funded in a way that is more accessible and can be useful in different forums. So we're not just pointing to the report or the meeting, but we have other materials. So we are actually working on that in the meantime, Brian, as well. So we can keep you all posted.
Great. Thanks, Tegan. David?
Sorry, yes. Do any of you guys, do we know at all any part of any of this work that's being done regarding roadway pricing? Is there any of the data that's being collected? Does anything look at the shifts of traffic, like from interstates, which would now have an increased price, onto local streets, local neighborhoods, as people use their GPS, or they just look to avoid paying more? Thanks.
Thanks, David. Anyone have knowledge on that?
Yeah, I think one of the, I'm sorry to jump in here, but I think one of
Go ahead.
the studies that are one of the, we study several areas, in the study that was most recently done by MPO, I think one of them did talk about shifts of travel patterns, but certainly there's research on that.
Renaud?
Yes, I would echo Leonard in that there are several studies out there that we can look into that would provide us estimates of behavioral change, especially when it comes to route choice to avoid tolls or charging. But I am not aware of any studies in our region.
Thanks, Renaud. Tom?
No, I think that's a great point that David brought up, because we see that here now in Somerville. Like when 93 backs up, they're coming off and they're cutting through side streets, and it's funny. I can always tell coming into work if 93's backed up, because my commute should be about 10 minutes, and it could be 25 or 30 to get from one end of Somerville to the other. So I'm anticipating people would do the same things, and with technology like Waze, GPS. And I know a lot of people are complaining about that because it's cutting them through, people are cutting through neighborhoods now that normally, they say Google Maps or whatever doesn't take them through. So, I think that's something that we should take a look at as part of this whole thought. Thanks.
All right, great. Thanks, Tom. David?
Yeah, so thank you, Tom. I agree with that. I think we should, keep on thinking about behavioral changes. In Newton, it's always been an issue. Whenever you change something on the pike, there's all sorts of different ways to avoid getting on the pike at different places just by cutting through, local streets through Newton and other places. So let's not forget about that. As far as maybe it's not a EJ impact, but it's an impact for everybody, I guess. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, David. All right. Yeah, and I'll just say, from MassDOT's standpoint, we do have an action item in our statewide long-range transportation plan that's about to be published, released for public comment, that calls for studying this issue at a state level as well. And I know there's, of course, discussions at the task force, like Brian mentioned, that we will be directed to study this one way or another, right? And as part of that, we will be coordinating with CTPS and others, at the regional level. So I think it's going to be studied, right? It's just, it's just a matter of who's going to do it and how much funding is needed to really do it, give it due diligence. So, it's tough timing, right? With like having to decide this now without fully knowing what we'll be studying in the scope of that. But certainly, details will be shared as they become available. But I just wanted to say that as well, that I think there is a lot that will happen over the next year at the state level to study this in more depth as well. So still really helpful discussion here on that. We can move on to the next one on learning from transit outage and closure experiences.
Yeah, so this was submitted by Logan Casey just before he left. But we thought this was a really timely study that looks at how we as a region can best respond to transit outages or just generally kind of disruptions in our transportation system. I think this definitely starts off looking at case studies, best practices, and aims to come up with some kind of understanding of how the Boston region can best plan for or adapt to network disruptions.
Should I go?
Welcome any thoughts here.
Any comments on this one? Leonard.
No, well, I mean, I think we could study how Boston areas handle the major outages. That we've had. Trying to come up with a different word, diversions that we've had. And so yeah. So I'm okay with the study. My big concern, is that Logan wants to redefine emergency to apply to more things. And I guess I really want to keep emergency as like crisis level. Other things can be urgent. And so that's it. Maybe it's a quibble, but it's more like I try to keep the temperature down on things. Because we humans, we kind of adapt. If everything's an emergency, then that's an emergency. So that's it. Thanks.
Brian?
Thanks. Is this a continuation of anything that's ongoing, or would this be a kind of a new beginning?
I think this would be a newer study. I don't think this would be a continuation of anything the CTPS is doing currently.
Okay. Well, just to note that I'm now hosting a monthly forum with communities in the T on diversions, sort of how they do it, what's coming up, how it's going. So there's recordings of that might be of interest to you. And there's been a lot of additional work that's already been done on this. So I feel like this might be one of those timing issues again, that this just doesn't really make sense right now. But I do appreciate what Logan's trying to do. And it's certainly something that I've heard a lot about.
Thanks, Brad. Tom?
Yeah, actually, Brian, thanks for telling us what you've been doing on that, because I know recently here with the Red Line being shut down, and the T, I thought did a good job responding to it, but it's how they respond to it. I know one of the complaints that we were hearing a lot was in Davis Square. There were so many buses that they actually, and these are large buses that they brought in. It totally screwed up traffic. It was like gridlock trying to get in and around there. And, the question was it an over response? Because, and again, it's all anecdotal. I'm hearing this from, businesses and people that I talk to. So I don't have any numbers on it, but, there'd be like 10 people on a bus and then there'd be 4 more behind it ready to go. And I know they're probably trying to, do whatever they have to do to minimize the disruption. But I think maybe more planning ahead of time on this would be definitely beneficial. So it's great, Brian, that it sounds like you're yeah, listening to some of this, and I'd be interested to see what comes out of it.
Thanks, Tom. Jen?
Also glad that Brian, that you're convening that group. I was just curious how if those conversations are being documented in any way other than the recordings, because that might be a beneficial addition that maybe doesn't actually need to be a very huge scope, but for MPO staff to like kind of be making sure that like records of what is being shared are being kept and compiled in a way that might be useful.
Thanks, Jen. Cool. All right. Well, I don't see any hands, so we can move on to the next one, T2. Looking at long-term operation funding for on-demand transit and other regions, and understanding that grants are not feasible for long-term operational funding, which is a concern I've definitely heard from our rail and transit division as well. And I know other regions statewide, or other regions in Massachusetts. So any thoughts on this one?
No.
Leonard?
I think I was subconsciously thinking about this when I made my comment at the board meeting yesterday. I think we really need to get a handle on the costs, and how we're going to bear those costs. First off, whether we should, and then how we do it. So yeah, I have more thoughts on this. They're not well formulated, but I definitely think this is worth us understanding, because we have other micro transit projects underway, that we need to assess. And it'd be good, to have some sense of how to assess those. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Len. Other thoughts? All right. Don't see any, so move on to the next page, which is understanding suburban change and impacts to transit demand.
Yeah, so this is one that Sandy submitted from the T. This is, again, as noted, one that we've discussed in the past. When we discussed it as staff, there was interest, but there were some limitations that we were running up against that I put in the comments to the right, namely that we don't necessarily have access to historic destination data back to 2000. There are some sources that we might be able to access to then extrapolate destination data. As noted, Infogroup publishes data on workplaces, but in general, we may not necessarily have the right tools to at least look back to 2000.
Thanks, Shalika. Comments on this? Len? Leonard? Sorry, I think you're muted.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I thought I
Oh,
had muted myself. Sorry about that. So at this point, it's not simply a matter of the move to the suburbs, but I think a bigger impact now is the pandemic, right? And so maybe, I don't know if that was mentioned in here. I read it quickly. I didn't see pandemic. So I guess if I was going to do something like this, I would want to incorporate the pandemic into the mix. So that's it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Len. I agree. Jen?
I'd also be curious, if this is something like the type that would be useful for the T, is that something that could also be funded with MassDOT and T planning funds?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, we do have that pot of funding, right? It's called, I think, MassDOT and 5303 funding, which is transit planning funds that we work on separately. That's like this Blue Bikes First Last Mile Connections was funded through that, and MBTA Community Value was funded through that. So yeah, this would probably be a good candidate for that source. And if it's not going all the way back to 2000, right, I think it's still an issue worth studying, right, of how demand for transit has changed in suburban areas, especially in light of pandemic changes like Leonard mentioned. So yeah, I think it's a great candidate for that source, if not this one, so we can see how the ranking shakes out. But yeah, that's definitely an option, Jen. Tom?
Yeah, thank you. Glad to see this. I think this is a good study. Up to now, pretty much everything has been inner core focused, so it's nice to see something taking a look at outside of the inner core. And I do think that there have been changes in the suburbs, and I think the way that the MBTA is used out here has changed. So it would be nice to get a fresh look at it and see if there could be changes made.
Great, thanks, Tom. All right. Don't see others, so can move on to the next one.
Yeah. So the next two are studies that we are once again looking to do as part of our kind of ongoing program work. For the first one, I guess understanding the impacts of bus lanes on time savings and reliability. Staff are currently scoping a study to use replica data to determine whether those volumes have shifted. Unfortunately, the staff that are working on that study right now are not able to be on the call, but this is something that we're working on, and that I'm happy to connect MAPC with Rose McCarron, who is currently scoping the study.
Right, Shalika, Brian?
Yeah, thank you, David. David, sorry, you're not David Mueller. You're
Oh, yeah.
Derek. Sorry,
Yeah,
Derek.
no, yeah, that's fine. Yeah. I'll OTP. Yeah.
Big shoes to fill.
Exactly.
Just I would just suggest a slight amendment to the scope of this, if that's in order at this time. So there's been a lot, and my friend Brad Rawson actually brought this up recently at something I was at. There's a definite economic benefit and operational savings benefit to bus lanes, and that comes from allowing the same bus to make more trips on a route. And quantifying that would be incredibly helpful to folks trying to make arguments for more bus lanes. And so if that's something that could be added here, in addition to the kind of analysis of dwell time savings and time savings, the savings to the operating authority in terms of efficiency, I think would be really helpful. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Brian. I get that. Rebecca?
I just wanted to mention that this, Derek, is the study that we're currently scoping under the 5303 funds. And so we can, Brian, we can add that element in, because we haven't gone through the approval process yet.
Oh, great. Okay. Sounds good. Thanks, Rebecca. David?
Yeah, so we had recently talked about a study about how to keep vehicles out of bus lanes, right? What's the status of that study? Just yesterday I went to the MPO meeting, then took the 57 back home from there, and like the whole way in the bus lane, there's cars parked there, delivery vehicles. Is it working? I'm not sure. So does anyone know the status of that other study? If we're going to have bus lanes, they need to be available to the buses, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was parking and bike lanes, but obviously there's overlap there. Yeah, anyone speak to the status of that study? I think it was in the 2023 UPWP, right? Or the current UPW, right? Or was it last year? It might have been last year.
It's the current one. It's the current one. So
yeah, the current. Yes, we voted on it last year for this current year's. Yeah.
I think the study is in progress. I am not sure of where it's at though.
Stella, did you have one?
Yeah, I can jump in quickly just to say, I've been working on the engagement side of that study. It's well underway right now. I can't speak to all of the other technical analysis going on, but we currently have a survey out for folks to share some information with us about their experiences with cars in bike lanes. And the impacts that they're seeing. So we're getting great response so far, and I think I can pass along to the lead on that study that there's interest in sort of looking at potential overlaps with bus lanes as well. As mentioned, I think there would probably be quite a bit of overlap there, and I think perhaps that could be added towards the end of the study and sort of recommendations for future work as well.
Great. Thanks, Stella. Tom? I think you're muted, Tom.
Thank you. Again, David's brings up a good point. I think too, it's the level of enforcement by local police, to do anything about that. I don't really see a lot of enforcement, on that. But this also kind of ties into my thought earlier about, deliveries and things like that. And, because unfortunately what does happen is because of the way that it's set up, people are making deliveries to a small retail or grocery store, and the only place for that large truck to pull over is there used to be either parking or a loading zone there, and the loading zone may still be there, but because of the bus lane, there's an impact, So I think any kind of study with this, we really want to take a look at the whole picture of the bus and bike lanes and not just pieces of it. You got to look at it all, like how it's like a MPO thing that I had brought up years ago, was about some of the projects that we've done. We never went back and really took another look at them after we did them to see how well did we solve the problem, or not, and we've been doing that on a certain number of projects, and I think we've got a lot of valuable information out of it over the years. So again, I think it's something we need to do here, is to take a look at, instead of just studying more studies, let's take a look at maybe what we've done and see, okay, what works, what doesn't, and then kind of go from there. Thanks.
Yeah. Good point. Thanks, Tom. Rena?
Just want to say you need a study to figure out what works and what doesn't.
A study for a study, Len, right?
Well, study that this is so you got my point. So it's
we need a study to study the study. How's that?
There you go. Rena?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that the current study that we're doing on examining the effects of cars being parked in bike lanes has limited funding. So we are unfortunately forced to also look at that issue with a limited scope. But I do agree with Tom that we, in perhaps this round of funding or perhaps the next one, we should take a more holistic look at the effects of like how bus lanes and bike lanes interact with each other and users of these lanes interact with each other. So that's that. As for where we are with the current study, as Stella mentioned, we have begun outreach to both people who bike in our region and use these bike lanes, as well as in particular food delivery drivers who might be parking their cars for 5 minutes in the bike lane to go and get something from one of the restaurants or so on. In addition to that, we've also begun our literature review of looking at what people have found. So we are making progress and hope to present something to you as well as folks on the board fairly soon.
Great. Thanks, Renak. All right. Move on to the next one then. T2.
This, like the previous one, is something that we're looking to do in our ongoing work. But as the notes mention, similar to some of the staff comments to T1, this might require a pre-post framework, which makes it difficult to do within 1 year, which is part of the reason why we are not necessarily looking to fund it as a discrete study, but is definitely an interesting idea. It just might take a bit more planning and scoping than anticipated.
Gotcha. Thanks, Shalika. That's on this one. this one is okay. That's the full description. Okay. How did level of service change after bike and bus lanes implemented? Okay. Yeah, it seems like it could tie into the other one too, and ongoing work happening. All right, keep us moving. Then we can move on to resilience, which I think there's just two more, right? R1 and R1 highlighted. So we start with the first one here.
Yeah. So these are the last two studies. So R1, that would be more of a discrete study, wants to look at flood impact on destination access. So this study idea has come out of conversations we've been having through the discrete study applying Conveil to project scoring, which staff are working on currently. Conveil is a destination access tool and something that we have been talking about a lot as we've been exploring its use in MPO work is how flooding or other kinds of climate events impact destination access. So this study specifically wants to look at flood impact using the NCFRM outputs, and it hopefully will be able to give us a better idea on how really climate change is going to impact destination access. And I think staff would also be interested in looking at the results of this study in comparison to the travel demand model. And I believe Judy is on the call too, if there are any specific resilience focused questions to answer, but happy to take any questions here.
Shalika. Anyone thoughts on this? Certainly an interesting topic. I think there's a lot of uncertainty, right? Even with the flood risk model, right? It's like, I don't know. It seems like it's interesting, right? But the results aren't quite as maybe tangible to communities as some of the other ones proposed here. But I think it's certainly an interesting topic. And something that would be interesting to see. Jen?
Yeah, just general, would like to, I think, support work in this area. I don't know of that many other folks doing this, although I guess maybe ignorant if there are. But yeah, I generally would like to see staff be able to resilience efforts and making like I think this has application for our own scoring and think about projects and programs moving forward.
Thanks, Jen. All right.
I will say this is something that staff are very excited about. The current Conveil work has had a really big learning curve, but we are really exploring how this very interesting tool could be used for the MPO's work. And flood impact is just one of the things that we want to do with Conveil going forward. But destination access, I think, really humanizes what we talk about when we're talking about equity impacts. And in this study specifically, the intersections between equity and climate resilience on transportation. I think it's something that staff in particular are really interested in.
Shalika? Len?
So I mean, anytime staff is excited about something, it makes me want to support it. I just feel that I need to understand more about Conveil. I know that there was a study, that's probably underway now. Well, I know it's underway now. About using the Conveil effectively. So I wouldn't want to delay this in order to see the results of that. But maybe I'll look around the net myself, to just understand the basics of Conveil more. But if you want to throw me a link or two, where I can kind of get up to speed more on what Conveil does and how you all are using it, it would make me feel a lot more confident in my support. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Len. Yeah, Conveil is it's a tool that says, like, from this place you can reach 20,000 jobs and X number are in healthcare and X number are in, different industries. And then, you can reach 10,000 by transit, 10,000 by car, like it breaks it down at how many different destinations you can reach by different modes at different times. So it's an interesting tool. And it sounds like this study, right, it would be saying like, if this area had some kind of constraint or sort of impedance, if we're talking about modeling terms, right, like if there's like some constraint on accessing an area, access might go down by 10,000 jobs if this area becomes flooded, right? So I don't know. I like conceptually this idea. I think it would help to complement it with maybe somewhat like a qualitative element. So it's not just saying, right, like here's quantitatively how many destinations would change as a result of flooding, which is all very subject to context. Like, even though we have flood risk modeled, right, like if it's that far in the future, right, it's very unpredictable of how things might change. So I don't know, I'd be interested in like just hearing people's experiences getting around in light of maybe areas that frequently flood. Like, I like this idea conceptually. I just think it might be useful to complement it with some qualitative or public engagement type aspect to it as well, in addition to what Conveyo might be able to offer. Because yeah, it does feel a little theoretical the way it's framed right now, but that's my 2 cents at least right now.
Yeah, no, that's helpful feedback. So I can take that back to staff to kind of look at where we could add a bit more of a qualitative analysis lens on this. And Len, I can connect with you offline about Conveyo in general. I'm the project manager for that one. So we are deep in that work, and it's been super interesting. So I can connect with you on some more resources about Conveyo.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Shalika. Judy?
I just wanted to say I appreciate that feedback, Derek. And this would coincide with us wrapping up the environmental engagement study we're currently working on. So ideally, we would have a lot of great connections with municipalities and advocacy groups that we could get some legitimacy on whether this would be helpful, and definitely a non-asset based assessment of flood impacts in the region is something that is lacking right now. So yeah. Thank you for the support.
Yeah, no, of course, yeah. That's great. Sounds good. All right. I've got one left on the list here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So this last R1 is really sitting at the intersections of performance-based planning, programming, climate resilience, and potentially the congestion management programs. And it looks at specifically evaluating the change in air quality metrics and whether that could be or how that impacts or is impacted by recently completed roadway projects. So this was submitted by Sam Taylor, and I'll defer to him and if he's on the call, and Judy to answer any questions about this. But this is another one that we would like to do within one of our programs, as this is something that would probably require some ongoing monitoring. So having more than 1 year to complete this work in full might do the work justice.
Thanks, Shalika. It's looking at change in air quality metrics and proximity to completed projects. Okay. Jen?
I just wanted to offer to connect you all with folks in our environment department and Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics have been, I know we've been working in this area as well. I don't know the specifics of sensors and whatnot, but I know that we've been conducting air quality gathering air quality information around Cummins Highway, and we're like as part of like kind of a before after of that roadway reconstruction project. So anyway, I'll help you all kind of figure out where there might be overlap there.
Cool. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, it's a really interesting idea. So, all right. Well, I know this is only getting referred to other programs anyway, so I think we've covered everything on the list. With our remaining 3 minutes, Is there anything else, Srileka, or is that it for the more formal item?
So that is it for the formal items. Just the last slide that I had for the next meeting, which we can do that after members' items.
Okay, great. Are there any members' items? Seeing none, yeah, can move on to next meeting then.
Yeah, so the next meeting is going to be on April 11th at 1 p.m. on Zoom. I will be sending out a survey to rank your study preferences. It'll be a similar format to previous years. And then I'll come to that meeting with those results. It'll be both, of course, a staff survey and committee survey. Also at that meeting, I will be presenting Amendment 2 to the FFY 2024 UPWP. This is just the internal budget adjustments that we do through the course of the year. And that will be presented at that meeting and will hopefully go to the board on April 18th at that meeting.
Great, thanks, Shalika. All right. Well, with that, I'll ask for a motion and second to adjourn. Brian?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Sorry.
All right. I think without objection, we're adjourned. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you on the 11th, if not sooner, or we'll definitely see you at the MPO meeting. So we'll see you there. But have a great weekend,
everybody.
everyone. All right.
And the Tipper
bye.
meeting. Don't forget about that.
Oh,
next
Tipper,
week.
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
There's so much going on. Yeah.
5
Thanks,
hours
Phil.
this time, right, Jen?
Certainly a lot to talk about. Yeah. All right.